So WCCF Tech has updated their article of what Chris Drink said and put his tweet in there. However, the tweet is not my main focus. Decided to watch a little bit more of the podcast, and I made it into about 34 or so minutes. And something was very interesting that was brought up by one of the pundits in this case. The second gentleman around the 34-minute mark, and they were asking about Game Pass and Call of Duty. So this is around the timestamp, and let me give a little bit of what I think is kind of like the context here that I'm seeing. A lot of pundits are looking at Call of Duty and looking at, the whole Activision acquisition and saying that the benefits of that in terms of Game Pass have not necessarily yet been realized. You know what I mean? In that particular case, many of them are like, well, it doesn't seem like this Call of Duty thing has done anything for Game Pass and so on and so forth. Now, what many of them don't realize is I don't think they understand that Microsoft does not need Activision, never did need Activision. But if you were to ask me as to why they acquired it, well, the answer is in the FTC trials. They saw an advantage in a way to basically take on PlayStation's biggest money bringer that was an external game, a third-party game that PlayStation was not necessarily investing much money in and making a lot of money from, and using that money to conduct their business in different ways. And one of PlayStation's major pillars was money hatting or blocking games from going to Xbox from what we've seen. Now, as to whether the exclusives that PlayStation was also, basically making was coming from those funds, I can say likely so, but Xbox realized that if we take on this particular thing, it basically is a multifaceted advantage for us, for our business, in my humble opinion. That's what I think went down. Now, let's listen to that, question that was asked here, and we'll go ahead and kind of jump into what I think are, some pertinent aspects to this conversation that I think a lot of pundits probably need to take a look at.
About subscription service of people we know. Have they all unsubscribed now that now that that's happened? Actually, no. So I've got some data from Sakana. I'm going to get it up here.
So they were talking a little bit about, the potential and the possibility of those people who may have subscribed and jumped into Game Pass at the time when Call of Duty came out, even though, yes, that number was a big boost. They're asking, have these people unsubscribed and so on and so forth? Well, the data sets basically say no, but that's not really what I'm actually pursuing. What I wanted here is the gentleman in the brown hoodie. He said something or asked a question very interesting.
I was just thinking, if Call of Duty is the entry point for Game Pass, really, is the main selling point, do they have an entry-level subscription tier just for Call of Duty guys who wanted to sign up to this? Because Game Pass, as a sort of fairly casual consumer of games, Game Pass as a proposition doesn't have like a focal point. It's just, here are a load of games that you may or may not enjoy. Whereas
now, as to that opinion, that's his opinion. I mean, we can talk about that all day. We can sit here and we can dance around the whole conversation, of which, like I said, that's his opinion. There's much to be considered. However, I think a lot of people somewhat think that Game Pass and its focal point is probably Call of Duty, but the data betrays all of this, because if you guys remember from the FTC trials, there were some numbers that were cited, and one of them was very interesting and said that basically around 1 million gamers spent 100% of their time on PlayStation playing Call of Duty. These people may or may not move platforms, and if they did, what is going to be the exact difference for them? If all they play is Call of Duty, they may be comfortable just playing Call of Duty on the platform that they own, or maybe they want to buy another platform to play Call of Duty. You never know. In the turn of the generation, there's the possibility that they may go ahead and move. But again, it's also one of those maybes. The second part is there is a huge number, which I think is about 70. This number of people spend about 70% of their time playing Call of Duty. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. This 1 million, I haven't questioned it. I think it's actually a very interesting number or something like that. But this was from like 2021, 2022. What Xbox is doing with Game Pass is not necessarily using it as just a Call of Duty thing. In fact, when PlayStation felt threatened that Call of Duty was going to make its way into Game Pass after the acquisition of Activision Blizzard King. Do you guys remember that? When they said that, they were thinking there was going to be exclusivity, but there was something that they also said from this document here from what the article that Just Corden put out that day. They said Activision provides incredible strategic value, and they said post-acquisition, Microsoft will put Activision games on Game Pass day and date. PlayStation saw this as a threat. What is the threat that they were seeing at the time? Well, the threat that they were seeing at the time was that it was going to provide more value for Game Pass. So Game Pass's focal point was already established as a subscription service where you're going to basically be getting brand new games day and date. And what was coming for PlayStation was that their biggest title of all of them, the one that made them the most money, Xbox was going to basically take it and immediately make that particular title that was such a big deal, making about, I think the documents that we saw, about $800 million a year for PlayStation, and pretty much go drop it on their service and give it to their consumers for a $19.99 subscription. At this time, Game Pass was not even $19.99. Game Pass was somewhere around $15 or so, right? So they saw the writing on the wall and they were like, crap, this game that we've leveraged, we've gotten special privileges on, free exclusive XP weekend on PlayStation, maps, all these things that made the game special for PlayStation that was basically bringing people who may have been playing on Xbox into PlayStation. All that was going away. So the Call of Duty conversation is a very, very layered thing that is much more than just Game Pass. It's Xbox basically removing something from PlayStation's grasp that made them very strong and then taking charge of it. So now if PlayStation needs to make a dime from Call of Duty, they got to go through their biggest, in some sense, console competitor, which is Xbox. That is the gateway to Call of Duty for PlayStation. That literally is a power move in many ways because now Xbox gets to set the terms. In fact, if Xbox really wanted to be petty, they'll just say, we want to take some time. Let me show y'all chess move upon chess move. But Xbox is not interested in doing this, which is weird. Xbox would just say, well, we want to take some time to implement more quality on Call of Duty, so we're going to skip Call of Duty this year. It's a $1 billion plus hit for them, but by golly, is it a huge, massive hit for PlayStation in a given calendar year? You're feeling me? If they delayed it, even if they just delayed it and pushed it into Q1 of next year or something like that, it will show up on the books of PlayStation because PlayStation leveraged Call of Duty for many years. So the pundits need to basically go ahead and take into account that the entirety of the Activision thing was basically a layered play. We'll put it on Game Pass. We're not going to lock it away, but what we're going to do is we're going to own it. And a major means of income that PlayStation has basically been making and using, we're going to control. Oh, yes. Not only that, the differential, which is now the Game Pass differential, is now with Xbox. So you play Call of Duty in quote equally on both platforms, but you get the subscription version on the Xbox side. So if you're a casual and maybe you're not in that 1 million or that percentage of people who play 100% of Call of Duty on Xbox, or if you're somebody who's never played Call of Duty on Xbox, well, what if you want to go ahead and try it out? Well, Game Pass is your avenue in there. So I would wish these pundits will look at it from a strategic perspective more than just, what is the focal point of Game Pass? Bro, Xbox Game Studios games have always been the focus of Game Pass since they launched the darn freaking thing. They didn't need anybody else. However, every acquisition that they now do that comes under the Xbox family, the core focus of Game Pass is that you will get these games at their AAA, AA, or single A quality that Xbox is making very first day they launch officially. That is the focal point of Game Pass. It's not about just the acquisitions. It's about the value proposition. And you see, many of these folk, I don't know what it is. Maybe they don't really believe it. Maybe because there is now a consumer-focused aspect to it, and it's coming from Xbox, who in, the case of fighting against PlayStation, has probably engaged, if not engaged, in anti-consumer, practices. For instance, like they did with Rise of Tomb Raider. I was on PlayStation at the time. I remember getting so mad at Xbox.
Call of Duty appears to be a very, very good and, possibly the main focal point and main reason to get an Xbox and get Game Pass, right? That's why Microsoft bought Activision.
Yeah.
Not exactly. You forget the power play and the positioning in the console business. See, again, I gotta say it this way. You now own a major piece of the gaming industry. So-called developers who may have been thinking in their minds that, what is the status of Xbox? Well, they now own basically the biggest publisher. So which means owning this publisher, they're going to put their games and make them available to their console, which may or may not attract people to their ecosystem. So other publishers from outside are looking and saying, ooh, what's going on here? This is their eyes. Okay, forgive me. They're looking and saying, what's going on here? Xbox is serious about business. Acquiring Activision was a signal to the gaming industry as well. I mean, you really got to look at this from multiple tiers. And these are my opinions, by the way. I'm not saying that they sat down and cooked up all that stuff within the Xbox and Microsoft coffers. But I won't be surprised because, again, these people are running a $3 trillion company. So strategy is something that really has got to be on the forefront of their minds. And so when you go ahead and go buy, $100 billion worth of publisher and such, and you say this is all for our people on the Xbox ecosystem, other publishers cannot help but say, heck yeah, you guys are ready for business. Good stuff. So now they're coming in. Look at Capcom. Capcom switched it up real quick. I was telling people back then, I said, yo, do y'all not see Capcom? They were like, what about Capcom? I'm like, guys, Street Fighter V, yes, people say PlayStation, went ahead and, sponsored the game, so it never showed up on the Xbox. However, Street Fighter 6 uses Azure's PlayFab. Like, they went in with Microsoft's infrastructure to get this game going. They not only did that, they went ahead and released the game on Game Pass day one. They put their Monster Hunter games on Game Pass. I mean, maybe this was pre-acquisition or post-acquisition, but everybody could see the moves that were going on. Even the Bethesda acquisition was already these guys are here to do business. And so if the pundits would only look at it from a strategic perspective, I have a feeling they'll probably come up with, a very similar conclusion as I am coming towards.
It's slightly puzzling to me why they haven't effectively marketed Game Pass as the Call of Duty Pass. Are there sort of legal problems related to that? It's not. I don't really get it.
It's not the Call of Duty Pass. It's Call of Duty just happens to be a benefit to Game Pass. That's all it is. Which is weird that you would say that, but it actually just is. It's designed to increase and improve the value of Game Pass. If they have to sit there and announce all the games on Game Pass, they're just gonna be blowing advertising money. The service will advertise itself.
As a proposition.
Well, I think they've shifted their strategy a little bit. So it was at one point all about Game Pass, and now I think they just realize Game Pass is one avenue to helping that discoverability and finding new audiences. And ultimately, I think Xbox is just a big publisher now, and they're not
all about Game Pass. Interesting, because if my recollection serves me right, they are also investing in hardware and expanding their ecosystem. Isn't that crazy? With cloud. I don't know, man. I think, this, again, tunnel vision, I think maybe kicking. Maybe he has something else to say.
Just a big publisher, but that is where they are. That's where they're at. And ultimately, I think Game Pass as a monetization mechanism for those sort of games isn't great. And so, making a cheaper entry-level version of Game Pass that's very focused on Call of Duty, maybe we'll see that going forward. They've certainly got a lot of data, I guess, for this one to see what to do going.
Or are they sort of quietly kind of giving up on Game Pass in general, and they're going forward, they're going to focus on just being a very, very large publisher of games?
I think it's both. I don't think so. I think they've had to move to PlayStation in order to make these games justify their investment. But I think Game Pass is a very sustainable business model. It's just making sure that that doesn't, if they can get their costs under control and make.
I don't know. I don't understand what's going on. Seems like a lot is getting cut back and forth. Man, how does nobody understand this business model? I'm just baffled, ladies and gentlemen, that this business model continues to behoove even those who are supposed to be experts at being able to analyze the layers that businesses like these will implement. I mean, why would they give up on Game Pass? Why would they just be a publisher? Like, have these guys calculated the number in terms of like what they make from Game Pass and what they make as a publisher? Their publisher side of things has not even necessarily hit as hard in terms of all of that, right? It's still them being sustainable by third-party games. Them being blocked by blocked away from accessing third-party games basically devastated their business. You know what I mean? They really PlayStation made it hard for them, according to what Phil Spencer said. They lost the console war. So how are they going to go back and then depend on that thing? So they decided to change it up. They bought a bunch of games and they're taking them to other platforms, but they're also giving, you know what? These pundits can continue to basically just think what they want to think, honestly. Let's just see this thing just play out. It's okay. At this point, I'm just like, I should not be. If this was maybe like a comment from somebody, it's probably a whole different conversation. But at this stage, like, yo, I mean, thanks for watching the video. Peace out.